welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and welcome to another of the 12 Days of Christmas. Today I'm doing kind of more of a chatty video rather than focused on goals or books that I've read, but I've been wanting to do a video like this for quite some time to talk about how Booktube has affected and changed the way that I read. I'm probably not alone in realizing that the influence of having a lot of my consumed media being surrounding books, of course that is going to change the way that you read as it broadens your horizons, exposes you to different books, but there are pros and cons. I'm going to talk about the pros first, and actually I just mentioned the first one in that it's expanded my horizons. So before I joined Booktube, I was very much a classics reader, and obviously I still am. That is still a huge bulk of what I read every single month, but that was like most of what I was reading. Sometimes I would go to the library and check other things out, or I'd get recommendations from my sister or things like that, but I didn't have a steady source of recommendations. So to come onto Booktube, then I'm exposed to genres that I don't know a whole lot about that now I read a lot of, such as like epic fantasy. I love epic fantasy and really didn't know anything about it at all. I hadn't even heard of Brandon Sanderson before I joined Booktube, and I was always a little leery to just randomly pick up a book because there are certain content things that I don't want to consume in the literature that I'm reading. And so as a result, I would be afraid to pick up books because I didn't have a reputable source to look up content warnings. In addition to introducing me to some now favorite genres, Booktube has also introduced me to genres that aren't really favorite genres, but people have been excited about books. And so I've tried them. Sometimes I've loved them and been surprised by them and had books that I just really enjoyed reading from a genre that's not really my style. And sometimes I've read books and found I don't really like them. And I think that was kind of what happened when I first joined Booktube, is that I was inundated by all of these recommendations. And so as a result, I was reading a lot of books that I thought, if someone says it's good, it must be. And it's not that those books were actually inherently bad or poor quality. I just found what my personal reading taste is and solidified it that much more. I think being on any sort of bookish social media, whether that be YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all of those medias that have books, I think you then have an awareness of what buzzy books are and what new releases are coming out that people are either excited about or they have recently come out and it feels like everyone's reading them. And I think I didn't really know that before. That has been something that has contributed a lot to my life, and knowing what's really popular and all of that kind of stuff. That's kind of very fun to know what the buzzy books are. Typically, I don't read buzzy books, especially when they first come out. I'm the kind of person that I wait for the dust to settle. I often wait until a book has been out for maybe like a year or something, unless it's an author I've previously read and loved. But I can then see after time, like if it sounds interesting and it's a buzzy book, I'll wait a little bit until some more well-rounded reviews start trickling in, and then I can more easily make a decision. One of my favorite things that Booktube has done for me and has changed in me is that for me, now reading is often a social event, and it never used to be. We think of reading, we think of introverts, we think of quiet, we think of people who just, want to sit in a corner and read. And admittedly, I am still that person that I love to sit in a corner and read, and I love the quietness and the peacefulness. But a lot of the books that I read now, and the books certainly that I prioritize every month, I'm reading because I'm reading them with other people, whether that be for my in-person book club, whether that be for my Patreon book club, whether it be buddy reads or things like that. I tend to prioritize the books that I'm planning to read with other people. That's super fun. It's not something that I used to do previously. I used to just read a book, and then sometimes I would talk about it with my sister, who is at the time my only other bookish friend. Despite growing up in a homeschool community, you would think that all my homeschool friends would be big readers, but none of them were. I was the only like really big reader. I had a few friends who enjoyed like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, but there weren't people who were consistently reading books. And so I didn't have a lot of people to talk with about books. And that has been such a gift on Booktube. That's why I started my channel, because I was reading books and I'm like, I really want to talk to somebody about this. And maybe I'm just speaking into the void and no one will ever hear the thoughts that I have, but I can at least verbally process. And maybe I can find people who also read this book and also have thoughts and also want to talk about it. And since then, that has morphed into not just chatting with you guys in the comments, which was my original intention, but it's morphed into having buddy reads with people and participating in read-alongs and live shows and having lots of friends that I now read with on a consistent basis, and that has been such a blessing. Something that I never did before Booktube. I not only had never heard the phrase TBR, which if you're newer to Booktube and you haven't heard that yet, it just means to be read. It's a pile of books that you plan to read. Not only had I never built a monthly TBR, I had a zero structured reading at all. And I bet that that sounds really weird to you because my reading is very structured now. It's actually a little bit structured right now than it was, in previous years of being on Booktube. It used to be that like I had a set TBR and I would have scheduled reading every day. And I've since needed to take a step back from that because there was a time period in my life on Booktube where that was working really well for me. But currently that feels a little bit too constrained for me. But it's interesting because I was exclusively a mood reader before I started on Booktube. I never had a plan of what I was going to read. If I felt like reading, I'd pick up something on my shelves or I'd go to the library and pick up something and I would just read it. I never had a plan of I want to finish this at a specific time. I want to read this in a specific month. I never read seasonally. I never had any plan for what I was ever going to read ever. And people talk to me now and they're like, "Oh, I'm such a mood reader. Like how do you go from being a mood reader to being a more structured reader?" And the answer to that is actually that I usually am reading a minimum of 3 books at a time, but it's usually more like 5. 6 is like my max. If I have more than 6 books, I'm not going to make progress in any of them. And actually, even 6 books these days, I'm not making much progress in them. But if I have 3 to 5 books that I'm reading at the same time that are all different genres, I can mood read within the books that are on my TBR or that I'm currently reading. And so that's kind of how I navigate that. If I'm reading books that are all the same genre, then I start feeling kind of that burnout, that fatigue of feeling like I can't mood read because everything has kind of a sameness to it. But that doesn't happen very often. Like I will typically have a classic going, a fantasy going, a nonfiction going, and then sometimes on top of that, I will have duplicates within those genres, or I might have, like a literary fiction or very rarely a historical fiction or a mystery. So it just depends. But even if I have buddy reads going, I can mood read within those buddy reads. And so that affords me a feeling of freedom and being able to follow a bit of moodiness while also having a structured TBR. The huge benefit for me of having a structured TBR is that it enables me to get to books that I've really wanted to get to. So I can make plans and be excited about those plans of books that are on my shelves, and it's ensuring that I'm reading those books that I've heard about or that I've wanted to read. And then also, if I'm planning ahead, then I can make sure that I'm reading with people that I really want to be reading with. And that has been something that has been interesting this year and will be even more interesting, I think, next year as my reading has slowed way down this fall. I'm planning less buddy reads, but I'm still making sure I'm spacing out my buddy reads in such a way that I'm not overwhelmed. So I have buddy reads scheduled through December of next year already. The final thing that Booktube has really helped me with is it's helped me to read more, because there is a layer of accountability that happens when you have a channel. And it's not like I feel like you guys are going to be sitting there like, aren't you supposed to be talking about that book that you said you were reading or anything like that? But I want to be talking about the books that I'm reading. And so I think if I want to be able to produce content and be able to chat with you guys about that content, I need to be reading. And so it does help with that. Like, it gives an added layer of accountability, especially if I am hosting a read along or a readathon, then there's even more kind of visibility. But even a monthly TBR video does give me some accountability. Are there times when I come on and I didn't read books on my TBR and I tell you I didn't and I kick it to the next month? Yeah. Are there months where I didn't read that book at all or I DNF'd it and I don't even mention it to you? Yeah, definitely. But I think wanting to be able to put out TBR videos, monthly wrap ups, vlogs, all of those things really help me make sure that I am reading and help to build like a daily reading habit. I did have a little bit of a daily reading habit before I started Booktube. I actually did it when I was consistently like bullet journaling, which now my bullet journaling is mainly comprised of just book journaling. But for years, I did a full bullet journal that had all of my homeschool planning, it had all of my regular planning, it had habit tracking, and it had book tracking. It had all of those things because I couldn't find a planner that had everything that I wanted. So when I was doing more habit tracking in my bullet journal, one of the habits that I started wanting to check off daily was reading for 15 minutes every single day. And sometimes I would set a timer, or sometimes I would just sit down and read. And so that really helped me get into a daily rhythm. And that actually started before Booktube, because before I started Booktube, I think probably one of my highest read book years was 2020, which is not different from all of you, I'm sure. We were home so much more. Things were closed, things ground to a halt. There was a lot less busyness and people had more time to read. I did not yet have a channel in 2020. I started at the beginning of 2021. And so I definitely was still reading pretty frequently, but I was consuming Booktube starting in 2020 is when I started watching Booktube. And then 2021, I started my channel. And I actually think that that was like my highest number of books read in previous years. Like both 2020 and 2021 were in the like close to 200 range of books read. And that has not even come nearly close. The years after that, I read like a little over 100 books. I think there was one year that I barely read 100 books. And then there have been some years where I've read 120 or 130, but I'm reading more because I want to tell you about it, even though I'm reading less this fall than I have been. I'm still reading, I'm still coming and talking to you about it. It's not like I've stopped reading entirely, even if I'm feeling slumpy or even if I'm feeling busy and have less time to read. Okay, my cons list is way shorter than my pros list, and that's a good thing. Booktube has certainly changed my reading for the better, but there are some things that I kind of have to keep tabs on myself about. Otherwise, I can allow Booktube or social media to kind of ruin my reading a little bit. One of those is the pressure to read books that are on my TBR. And I just told you that that's a good thing, that it's helped keep me accountable. But then I think sometimes I feel like I have to read those books and I can't ever break out of those books. Granted, if they're buddy reads or if they're read-alongs or something I'm reading for a book club, I am going to prioritize those books. But then the other books that I add to my TBR, I can easily feel like, oh, I really want to pick up this book over here, but I can't because I said I was going to read this book, but not this book. And so that's something I've definitely gotten better about and given myself more freedom. But I used to feel incredibly constrained by my TBR. And I've heard some people, instead of referring to their TBR, calling it a POP or a pile of possibilities, because then it's like, oh, it's possible I'll get to that, but maybe I'll do something else. And so they feel like they're not breaking the rules, which honestly, a TBR is what you want to be read. So you can change that at any point during the month. But I think that sometimes you feel like when you publish a TBR, or you talk about a TBR, or even write it down somewhere, like it's something that you have to be held to. And that's something that I've realized that I don't have to do, which is incredibly freeing. But there was a time period where I'm like, oh, I wish I could read that, but I have to read this instead. And so that was something that definitely dragged down my reading for a little bit. Another thing that can be difficult with Booktube, especially when you have the format of monthly TBRs and monthly wrap-ups, is that sometimes you feel this constraint that you have to finish a book by the end of the month because you want to talk about it in your wrap up. And that has been something that is still a struggle for me, is that I feel like I have to finish a book by the end of the month so that way I can talk about it. And it's really like, I don't have to do that. I know some people that what they do is they'll just do weekly wrap-ups. They don't do monthly wrap-ups. And that's kind of smart because then you can talk about what you finished that week and what you're working on instead of saying like, making sure you're done with something by the end of a month. But I don't finish enough in a week to do weekly wrap-ups. That would then I just have like really scattered thoughts on the books that I'm reading. So it is better for me to do a monthly wrap-up for sure, but I have to let it go and be like, there are times I don't finish a book by the end of the month, and that's totally okay. I feel that crunch so much more in December because I want to finish a book by the end of a year. So that way I can count it in my books finished. So that way I can be like, well, what if this is a favorite book? Like, what if I'm going to love this? It's going to make it into my top 10. I want to make sure I finish it so I can put it there. And so there's even more pressure, I think, towards the end of the year than there is just month to month. Hopefully, I'm not the only one that still struggles with that, but I never used to care when I finished a book. Who cares whether or not I finished it within the course of a year or within the course of a month? I never cared at all. But now, Booktube has shifted my thinking to think of reading in terms of how much I read in a month. And I guess Booktube's not the only thing that does that because I currently use Storygraph for most of my book tracking. I've kind of like eased off Goodreads a little bit, but Storygraph actually gives you like a monthly wrap up that shows you how many pages you read, how many books you read, top rated books of the month, shows your reading throughout the month because you can track like progress in your books throughout the month. And so if you do that daily, it'll actually show how much you read each day and all of that kind of stuff. And that's really fun. I love all the nerdy little things like that. I think it's just a blast. But that also reframes reading in a monthly time period rather than just like reading whenever you want to read. And so it's weird. It's weird. It's one of those things that I didn't realize how much my perception of time surrounding reading had changed because it's just so normal on Booktube. Number 3 is one of the hardest things for me. Actually, it is definitely the hardest thing for me with Booktube, and that is having bookish FOMO. I am constantly having the fear of missing out when I hear my friends are reading a book that I want to read, or they're hosting a read along, or they ask me if I want to help co-host this read along. And like, I never want to say no. Anytime someone reaches out to me and is like, do you want to read this book with me? Do you want to host this thing with me? And then I see things pop up where people are talking about bookish events, and there's so many events happening all the time. And of course there's like, the major ones that I do participate in, like Feb Regency, Middle Grade March, Fictober, Nonfiction November. Like there are some that I do just always gravitate towards because now I associate that type of book with that month, and that's just how my brain works now, and that is totally fine. But there are other events. I know, like, I think it was this past fall that Holly from Lovely Day with Holly was hosting like a Lord of the Rings themed read along, and she's done it a couple of years, and every time I'm too busy to participate, but I always want to. I always want to. And I always want to. If any of you ever asks me, like, hey, do you want to participate in this read along or readathon? Or hey, do you want to read this book with me? I always want to. And I have a really hard time saying no. And I know that part of that is I am a people pleaser by nature. But even more so than that, it's just that like everything sounds so fun and I don't want to not participate in the things, but also I can't participate in all the things. I have gotten better about saying no. I have. But I still always feel this twinge and this desire and this wish that I could just do all the things. The last one on here actually has very much to do with my first point, talking about the pressure to read books on my TBR. I have a really hard time DNFing books. I always want to finish a book, especially if I'm reading it with someone else, which, like I said, a lot of my reading is quite social at this point. And so I feel a pressure to continue a book that I am buddy reading with a friend, or a book that I'm need to read for a book club, or that I'm hosting a discussion on, or whatever. I always feel like I have the inability to DNF books. Again, that's something I've really improved on this year. I'm going to do a video actually talking about all the books that I DNF'd in 2025 because I haven't talked about any of them, I don't think, on my channel at all. And I had I think August and September, I DNF'd like 7 books. And so I am improving, but it is really hard for me still because I always wonder if it's a beloved book. What if I stick it out to the end? Maybe it would be worth it. One of the books that I read last year, The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad, the first half of that book was almost excruciating. And the only reason I kept going is because I was doing a Patreon vlog for that book. Otherwise, I would have DNF'd it. But I kept going, and it ended up being one of my favorite books of the year. And so I'm always wondering, if I DNF this book, like, what if I'm missing out? And then there's always the added pressure of if I'm reading a book with someone else and I'm not enjoying it. And again, that's something that I never used to worry about, because I realize now I would not finish books all the time before I was on Booktube. Like, if I just wasn't enjoying it, I just kind of fizzle out with it and pick up something else. Sometimes it was intentional, like, oh, I don't like this, I don't want to read this. Sometimes it just wasn't doing it for me, and so I'd pick it up again later or something like that. And there was never even a thought in my mind about DNFing it. I mean, it's also true that I wasn't reading them with anyone, so that does make a big difference to me. If I'm reading them with someone, I really want to finish it. But I have a lot of really great friends who are very understanding if I don't finish a book. I actually DNF'd a buddy read in November, and both of my friends were very understanding when I was like, I don't have the mental bandwidth for this, and I don't like it. So I'm not going to. It was actually another Joseph Conrad book. So I was like, oh man, I should push through because it might be really great at the end and it might be so worth it. But I was like, guys, I can't do this. And they were so understanding. And I would be understanding too. If someone DNF'd a book that they were reading with me, I'd be like, no big deal. I totally get it. If you're not into it, you're not into it. It's fine. But yet I feel like this, I have this mental block, like the same grace wouldn't be given to me, that people would just be like, why would you do that? You know, even though no one is going to say that. And no one is going to think that. But, you know, so it's double-edged. The fear of DNFing is, you know, because it might end up being really good and really worth it in a new favorite book. Or I don't want to let people down that I'm reading it with. And so there's 2 different ways I can go with that. But again, there is growth in that area. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What are some ways that Booktube has changed your reading, either for positive ways or negative ways? And I think that it's good to recognize if there are negative ways Booktube has changed your reading, because then that can help you grow and enjoy reading. Because sometimes if you let these external pressures or just expectations, whether they're expectations someone else has put on you or expectations you've put on yourself because you've made yourself believe it's the norm, it can suck the joy right out of reading. And there have been times where I was not DNFing any books. I was reading every book in a month. I was being super structured with my reading, and I wasn't burnt out, and I was having a great time. But different seasons call for different approaches to reading, and I think that that's true with just anything in your life, in any season of your life. If it's a consistent hobby or whatever, it's going to change based on what your life is looking like at various times. So some of these things were not really things that were a bad thing before, and then they became a negative thing that I had to kind of talk myself back from. But overall, Booktube has had an overwhelmingly positive impact on my reading, and I will forever and always be grateful that I started watching Booktube, that I started my own channel, and am now able to connect with all of you. I have made so many friends as a result of Booktube, and there are so many of you that comment on all of my videos or even just some of my videos, and I recognize your usernames, and some of you I've gotten to know, I want to say in real life. Most of them are, you know, not in real life. They're actually, you know, still in an online space, but there are many of you that I talk to outside of the comment section of my videos, and that is just like such a blessing, such a gift, and my reading has broadened and has become more diverse, and I feel like I've grown as a person as a result of extending what I read. And so Booktube has been such a blessing and something that I will always be grateful for. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me and more of the 12 Days of Christmas, and I will see you again next time.